I'm a retired cop now, living in a small town where time moves a little slower and people still smile at strangers. I spend my days volunteering at the community center, teaching kids about safety, playing chess with the older folks, and lending a hand wherever it's needed. When I'm not there, I'm over at my daughter Emily's place, helping her with her newborn. It's exhausting, sure, but in a good way. I've learned more about diaper changing than I ever thought I would, even back in the days when Emily herself was just a baby. Lately, though, things have been different. Not on the surface. Everything looks fine. But inside, there's a heaviness. It's because of a case from 1979. The strangest incident in my 30-year career. One that still keeps me awake some nights. We got a call from a suspect. A call that should have been impossible. The man had been declared dead. I remember every detail, like a scene from a movie you can't forget, even though you'd give anything to stop replaying it. It's as if my mind refuses to let go, always finding new angles to torment me with. Details I missed back then, moments that haunt me now. Emily's noticed my restless nights. She's good at reading me. Told me I should talk about it, maybe share what's bothering me. But it's a story I've kept to myself for years, something I'm not sure I can ever fully explain. It was easier not to talk about it, to let it sink deep into the past. I thought if I ignored it long enough, it would just disappear. But things don't work that way, do they? Some memories are like anchors, dragging you down whether you want them to or not. But now, there's this new podcast. Some local kids making a splash with their Unsolved Mysteries of the County series. And wouldn't you know it, one episode is about that very case, the one I've been trying to forget. People are talking about it again, and I can't shake the feeling that the past has somehow clawed its way back to the present. I feel a strange pull to set the record straight, to tell people what really happened. But the truth isn't pretty, and digging it up might disturb my family's peace. I'm torn. Part of me wants to come clean, to unburden myself, but the other part, the part that wants to protect my daughter and my grandson, wants to keep it buried for their sake. Emily asked me about it directly the other day. She'd listened to the podcast, wanted to know if I knew anything about that old case, her eyes full of curiosity and concern. I admitted I was involved, but I downplayed the details, said it was just a strange call, a mix-up. She didn't push, but I could tell she knew I wasn't giving her the whole truth. The secret sat there between us, an unspoken weight. I saw the way she looked at me afterward, the questions she didn't ask, and it made my heart ache. I wanted to tell her, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. The truth is, that case almost tore my life apart. Back then, my wife, Emily's mom, was terrified. She wanted me to leave it alone, to let it go. I remember her saying, "Some things are better left buried," and I knew she was right. But I couldn't stop myself. I kept digging, and it put a strain on us. I don't think I ever really got over what it did to our marriage. I lost her a few years ago, but sometimes it feels like that case started the cracks that eventually broke us. I remember the fights, the sleepless nights, the way she would look at me like I was slipping away. I see it all so clearly now, but back then, I was too caught up in the mystery, too obsessed to notice what it was doing to us. Last week, I decided it was time. Time to finally put this thing to rest. I went up into the attic, dug through old boxes until I found them. The files, the notes, the tapes. Everything I'd kept from that time, even when I shouldn't have. I reached out to Tom, a retired dispatcher who had been on duty that night. He's still sharp, even in his 70s, and he remembered it all. Agreed to meet me for coffee to talk it over. If anyone could help me understand, it'd be him. I remember sitting there in the attic, surrounded by dusty boxes, feeling like I was opening Pandora's box. I knew there was no turning back once I started, but the pull was too strong. Emily's dealing with her own struggles, balancing work, sleepless nights with the baby, and trying to keep it all together. I see the tiredness in her eyes, and I know she's pushing herself hard. It's strange. I see so much of her mother in her. That determination to keep moving forward even when everything feels overwhelming. We're both fighting our own battles, but I think that's what makes this journey matter more. Doing it together. There's a strength in her that I admire, and I realize now that I need to be strong too, not just for myself, but for her and my grandson. When I met with Tom, we talked about old times, shared a few laughs, but it didn't take long for us to get to the real reason we were there. I told him about the missing evidence, how the files weren't complete, and I needed to know what happened to them. He gave me a long, hard look before he leaned in close and said, "I kept a copy of the original recording." I couldn't believe it. Tom, always the careful one. He handed me a small cassette, and my heart skipped a beat. It felt like I was holding a piece of the past, something I never thought I'd see again. I remember my hands trembling as I took it from him, the weight of it more than just the plastic and tape. When I got home, I played the tape. The voice on the other end, it was him, the suspect who'd been declared dead. His voice, crackling through the interference, sounded almost otherworldly. And there were other voices too, whispering, like they were right behind him. I felt a chill, like a ghost had walked right through me. That night, the nightmares came back, and Emily noticed. She asked if I was okay, and I could only nod, afraid that if I spoke, my voice would betray the fear I was feeling. The dreams were vivid, dark figures, whispers in the night, shadows that seemed to reach out for me. It was like being back there all over again, caught in something I couldn't escape. Despite my skepticism, I considered consulting a paranormal expert. I was desperate. Emily insisted on helping. She wouldn't let me do it alone. We found someone who specialized in cases like this, a strange man named Carter, who had a reputation for dealing with things most people couldn't explain. He listened to the tape, nodding like he'd heard it all before, and said he could help us decipher what was really going on. He had this calmness about him, like nothing fazed him, and I found it both reassuring and unsettling. Emily stayed by my side the whole time, her presence giving me the courage to keep going. Over coffee one night, I finally shared the full story with Emily. Everything. How the call had come from the suspect, how he'd described things he shouldn't have known, how we found his body 2 days later in an abandoned house with no signs of anyone else being there. She listened, her eyes wide, her hand resting on mine. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't carrying the burden alone. We were in this together, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. She didn't judge me, she just listened, and that made all the difference. It was like I could finally breathe again. We went to the place where it had all ended, the abandoned house. It was falling apart, the windows broken, graffiti covering the walls. As soon as I stepped inside, it all came flooding back. The smell of decay, the sight of his body slumped against the wall, the feeling that something was watching us. I felt my knees go weak, and Emily grabbed my arm, steadying me. "We've got this, Dad," she said, her voice steady. Her strength kept me grounded, and together we walked through the house, retracing my steps from all those years ago. It was eerie, like the past was still alive in those walls, waiting for us. Carter listened to the tape again, this time with equipment I didn't understand. He picked up something, hidden messages, words buried beneath the static. They pointed to corruption in the police department, a cover-up that went all the way to the top. Names, dates, details that made my stomach turn. I knew some of those names. People I'd trusted. It was all connected, and suddenly it all made sense. Why we were told to let it go. Why my wife had been so scared. This wasn't just about a dead suspect. It was about power, about people willing to do anything to protect themselves. It was like a puzzle falling into place, each piece revealing something darker than the last. We confronted the retired police chief, a man I'd once looked up to. He was older now, frail, but his eyes still held that same coldness. When I pushed him, he finally broke. He confessed to everything, the illegal activities, the cover-ups, the threats. It was all there, laid out like a twisted story that had been waiting to be told. He talked about the pressure they were under, the deals they made, the people they hurt to keep their secrets safe. I felt a mix of anger and sadness. anger at what he'd done, and sadness for the man I'd once admired. It was like seeing a hero fall, and it hurt more than I expected. The authorities reopened the case and arrests were made. The media swarmed, and suddenly Emily and I were in the spotlight. It was hard, having our lives picked apart, but it was worth it. The truth was finally out, and I could feel the weight lifting, the shadows that had haunted me starting to fade. I knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be backlash, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were doing the right thing. Emily stood by me through it all, her support unwavering, and I knew I couldn't have done it without her. Emily found her balance. Watching her with her baby, I saw a strength in her that made me proud. She told me I'd inspired her, that seeing me face my past had given her the courage to face her own challenges. Our relationship grew stronger, the walls that had been between us crumbling away. We were a team now, supporting each other through whatever came our way. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about healing, about finding a way to move forward together. I saw the way she looked at her son, the love and determination in her eyes, and I knew she was going to be okay. I started mentoring young officers at the community center, talking to them about integrity, about duty. It felt like the right thing to do, passing on the lessons I'd learned the hard way. I wanted them to understand that the badge wasn't just about authority. It was about responsibility, about doing what's right even when it's hard. Emily and I talked more, really talked, and I could feel a new chapter beginning for both of us. We were rebuilding, piece by piece, and it felt good. I've been thinking about writing a memoir, not for fame or recognition, but to make sure something like this never happens again, to show people the importance of truth, of facing the past, no matter how painful it might be. I want to leave something behind, a testament to what we went through, to the lessons we learned. Maybe it'll help someone else. Maybe it'll make a difference. That's all I can hope for. Yesterday, I visited my wife's grave. I stood there, the wind rustling the leaves, and I told her everything. I told her the truth had finally come out, that the people who had caused so much pain were finally facing justice. I whispered a promise to honor her memory by continuing to fight for what's right, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the cemetery, and I knew that wherever she was proud of me. I walked away with a sense of calm, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that I wasn't alone. That was our first chilling tale, and if you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe for more. Now stay tuned, because we're diving into our bonus story, story number 2. I'm a high school history teacher, living right here in the same small town where I grew up. My name's Mike. I guess you could say life settled in a predictable way for me. Not that I'm complaining. I live with my wife, Sarah, and our daughter, Lily, who's 8 and already too smart for her own good. She's got her mother's curiosity and my stubbornness, which makes for an interesting combination. We've got a nice little house on Birchwood Street, close enough to the school that I can walk. The kind of place where folks know each other's names, wave at you even if they haven't seen you in years. But lately, things haven't felt so settled. Memories from 1986 have started creeping back, and I can't seem to shake them. It was the year everything changed, when my cousin disappeared without a trace. I was 16 back then, and I remember how it turned our whole world upside down. The cops searched high and low, and the town was in a constant state of worry, but nothing ever came of it. It's one of those mysteries that never really goes away, you know. Even after the headlines fade, the people left behind don't forget. It's been like a shadow over my life, one I've never really confronted until now. Sarah's noticed. She's always been able to read me, even when I try to put on a good face. She keeps asking if I'm okay, and I keep saying I'm fine, but we both know I'm not convincing her. Then there's Tom, my best friend since we were kids, who's now the sheriff. He's picked up on my unease too, but he hasn't pushed it. He knows me well enough to give me space until I'm ready to talk. It wasn't just the memories, though. A few weeks ago, strange letters started showing up in my mailbox. No return address, no name, just a few lines referencing the case from '86. They talked about things that nobody should know, details that weren't in the papers, things I never told anyone. It's like someone was watching all those years ago, someone who knows more than they should. I thought it might be a prank at first, maybe some twisted joke, but as more letters came, it stopped feeling like a joke. It felt like someone was trying to drag me back into a nightmare I'd tried to bury. Sarah found me staring at one of the letters late one night after Lily had gone to bed. She urged me to tell Tom. Said he'd be able to help, that I shouldn't have to deal with it alone. She's right, but part of me doesn't want to pull Tom into this. He's got enough on his plate. And besides, I don't even know what this is yet. Lily overheard us talking and asked if it was about a mystery, her eyes wide with excitement like it was some kind of adventure story. I tried to brush it off, but she's a smart kid. I know she's curious now, and that worries me. The thing is, it's personal. My cousin Jimmy was the one who vanished. He was like a brother to me. We did everything together. Rode our bikes around town, camped out in the backyard during summer, talked about everything and nothing until the stars faded into morning light. I'll never forget the night he disappeared. We were supposed to meet at the old water tower after dinner, but he never showed. By the time the sun came up, the whole town was out searching, but he was just gone. No leads, no witnesses, just an empty space where he used to be. After getting those letters, I knew I couldn't let it go. I had to figure out who was behind them and why now, after all these years, they wanted to drag Jimmy's memory back to the surface. I decided to talk to Tom finally. Told him about the letters, showed him the ones I'd kept. He went quiet, gave me that look he always does when he's thinking something over, then nodded. "All right, Mike," he said. "Let's see if we can't get to the bottom of this." We started digging. Tom let me into the archives at the station, the old police records, the yellowed clippings from the local paper. I even visited some of the older folks in town, the ones who'd lived here long enough to remember every little thing. It felt like we were unraveling a tangled knot, pulling at threads that had been left untouched for decades. But it wasn't easy. Key files were missing, and some people clammed up the moment I mentioned 1986. One guy even slammed his door in my face, muttering something about leaving well enough alone. Then there was Lily. She'd taken an interest in local history for a school project. A coincidence, or maybe not. She'd been poking around the library, looking through old town records. One night, she came to me with a puzzled look on her face, holding an old document. "Daddy, why does this say the town meeting in June of 1986 never happened? Grandma told me everyone was there that night." Her question threw me off. There were gaps, inconsistencies in the public records, things that didn't add up. It was like someone had tried to erase certain parts of that summer. That's when I found my grandmother's diary. It was tucked away in a box of old keepsakes, wrapped in a faded cloth. I almost didn't open it. It felt like prying. But something made me do it, and I'm glad I did. Her entries from 1986 were strange, full of cryptic notes about secret meetings, about the danger that had come to town. She mentioned Jimmy, how worried she was about him, and then nothing. The entries just stopped. It was like she knew something she couldn't bring herself to write down. I shared what I found with Sarah and Lily. We sat around the kitchen table late one night, the diary open in front of us, the letters spread out like pieces of a puzzle. It was the first time I'd talked to Lily about what really happened to Jimmy, about how it wasn't just some mystery, it was family. Sarah held my hand, and Lily listened, her eyes wide but determined. It wasn't just my burden anymore. We were in it together, and that gave me strength I didn't know I had. There was an old farmhouse on the edge of town, a place linked to the case, abandoned now. But back then it was owned by a man named Carson, someone my grandmother had mentioned in her diary. I decided to go there. Tom offered to come, but I needed to do this myself. When I stepped inside, the smell of damp wood and mildew hit me, and memories rushed back. The search parties, the whispers, the fear that gripped everyone back then. I felt my hands shaking, but I pushed on, moving through the empty rooms until I found what I was looking for, an old boarded-up cellar door. Inside the cellar, I found evidence that made my blood run cold. Old clothes, photographs, a stack of letters much like the ones I'd been receiving. It was like stepping into a time capsule, one that held every secret the town had tried to forget. And there, at the bottom of the pile, was a photo of Jimmy, taken in that very cellar. He looked scared, but he was alive. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Someone had kept him here. Someone in this town had known all along. That night, a final letter arrived. It directed me to a remote location, a spot deep in the woods where we used to play as kids. I knew I couldn't go alone, so I called Tom. He insisted on bringing backup, but I told him no, just him and me. We went out there, flashlights cutting through the darkness, the trees pressing in on us. And there, by the old clearing, we found him. Jimmy, alive. He was older, his face lined, his hair streaked with gray. But it was him. He looked at me, and for a moment, it was like we were kids again, like none of the years in between had happened. He told us everything, how he'd run away to escape someone dangerous, someone who had been using that farmhouse for things that were best left unsaid. The letters had been his way of reaching out, of seeing if it was finally safe to come back. The truth was more complicated than I'd ever imagined. The people responsible, influential townsfolk, people we'd grown up trusting, were long gone, taken by age or misfortune. They'd orchestrated everything, covered it up, made sure no one would ever find out. Jimmy had stayed hidden all these years, waiting for the right moment, waiting until they were gone. After that night, the case was officially reopened. Tom did his part, and the truth finally came out. The media got hold of it, of course. For a while, we were the center of attention. Reporters at our door, cameras flashing. It was hard, especially on Lily. She didn't like the attention, didn't like people asking questions about her dad and her cousin. But we got through it, and in the end, the truth was worth it. Jimmy came to live with us for a while. It was strange at first, having him back after all this time, but we made it work. He's family, and family looks out for each other, no matter what. Lily adored him, peppering him with questions about his travels, his life, everything he'd seen and done. He answered as best he could, but there were things he couldn't talk about, things he still carried with him, like scars that hadn't fully healed. Lily finished her school project, focusing on the true history of our town, the good and the bad. She presented it to her class, and Tom even came by to listen. She talked about the secrets people keep, about how important it is to face the truth, even when it's scary. I couldn't have been prouder. Life's different now, but in a good way. Our family is whole again, or as close to whole as it can be. The town is healing too. People talk about Jimmy's return, about the truth that came out, and there's a sense of relief in the air, like a wound that's finally starting to close. I've even started thinking about writing everything down, maybe not for publication, but for us, for Lily, for the future, so that what happened here isn't forgotten, so that the shadows don't fall over someone else's life the way they did over mine. Yesterday, I took Jimmy with me to visit Grandma's grave. We stood there in silence for a long time, the wind whispering through the trees, carrying with it all the words we never got to say. I told her we found him, that he was back, and that the people who hurt him were gone. Jimmy didn't say much, but he didn't need to. We both knew what that moment meant. Closure, a kind of peace neither of us had ever really expected to find. And now, as I sit here writing this, I realize that maybe the past isn't something you can ever really leave behind. It's a part of you, woven into everything you are. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you get the chance to face it, to drag it out into the light, and to finally let it go.